And we're ready to go, Todd.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Safety Included, which is the workplace safety and health webinar series presented by Encompass Michigan, the statewide network of comprehensive human service providers. Our topic today is hazard communication. My name is Todd Culver. I'm the president and CEO at Encompass Michigan, and I'll be joined momentarily by our education coordinator, Katie Kindy. The material that will be presented today was prepared under a consultation, education, and training, or SET grant that was awarded by the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or MIOSHA, which is a part of the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. Encompass Michigan has a longstanding partnership with MIOSHA as a SET grantee and as a strategic alliance partner, and we very much value that collaboration. My responsibilities with the association include leadership in program development, strategic and financial planning, always in alignment with our core purpose, our vision, and values. I've been with the association since 1995, also serving along the way as project director and assistant director. And as project director, the work that brought me to the association, I led a technical assistance and training project that was funded through this grant, focusing on occupational health and safety for member organizations. And I have a background in this area. Prior to coming to Encompass Michigan, I worked in manufacturing for a tier one automotive supplier with plant management responsibilities that included environmental health and safety and compliance with the accompanying regulations. And in fact, was doing that work when this when the Hazard Communication Standard was enacted. Katie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thanks, Todd. I am Katie Kindy. I'm a 35-year-old autistic self-advocate, but I am also the education coordinator at Encompass Michigan. I like to learn and help others learn. I graduated with a master's in education with a focus in learning design and technology in 2021 from Wayne State University. Um, at Encompass Michigan, I help create trainings, coordinate events, and I handle a certificate distribution. I've completed multiple leadership programs in 2023 to 2024. I've presented multiple times about autism in the workplace. I also became a co-leader in 2024 for the Michigan Advocates to End Seclusion and Restraint, but I am now on the NSAR board. In my spare time, I like to play video games with my husband, walk my dog, make jewelry, drawing, gardening, and creating miniature houses.
Thanks, Katie. Just a note about the content of this project, not just today's presentation, but all that are presented through Safety Included. And that is that inclusivity is very important to us at Encompass Michigan. And this presentation is made with all needs in mind. We try to avoid using too many colors or pictures. When we do have images, we try to describe them for low vision users. And our handouts and additional resources are available on a shared drive, and Katie will share that link in the chat during the presentation. The basis for the project is federal OSHA's recommended practices for safety and health programs, which offer a step-by-step approach to implementing those programs that are built around 7 core elements that drive success. The main goal of safety and health programs, and in fact of this project, is to prevent workplace injuries and illnesses, as well as the suffering and financial hardship that they can cause, not just to workers, but to their families and the organizations that employ them. These recommended practices use a proactive approach to managing workplace safety and health. Traditional approaches, on the other hand, are often reactive, where problems are addressed only after a worker is injured or becomes ill, or if a new standard or regulation is published or an outside inspection finds a problem that needs to be fixed. But these recommended practices recognize that finding and fixing hazards before they cause injury or illness is a far more effective approach, and that's true of our topic today. What this boils down to is that the most rigorous preventive safety program takes the view that there's always something different about an incident that led to an injury that could have been different. In other words, accidents don't just happen. It's important that each of us continuously assess the landscape to identify the potential for a problem, fix it before it occurs. And again, that's what this presentation is all about, to provide a framework for effective safety programs that promote prevention, filtered through the lens today of hazard communication. The presentation today, again, will use clear and structured visuals and graphics to support, we hope, comprehension. We'll discuss minimized sensory distractions on both virtual and in-person settings, present some options for verbal and nonverbal participation, suggestions for interactive components that can promote engagement without overwhelming, including time-buffered schedules that allow for processing and reflection. So the bottom line for us is that a safe workplace is sound business, and that's for everybody, regardless of neurotype. Our presentation today will be presented from two perspectives. The first will focus on compliance, and I'll be presenting that portion of the slides today. And then Katie will present some information on rendering the training in the health and safety arena, including hazard communication, more inclusive and more welcoming to all neurotypes. With regard to, if you can back up, Katie, what I'll cover today, thank you, is the MIOSHA standard itself. There are two very important components of the standard that involve container labeling and safety data sheets, and those will be reviewed. We'll provide you with some resources both from MIOSHA and federal OSHA. And again, then Katie will conclude with the inclusive approaches to training. Those approaches include some considerations for all employers that involve building trust, acknowledging the potential for sensory overload and sensitivities, strategies for engaging verbal versus nonverbal behaviors, clear signs, the concept of an emergency or safety buddy, proprioception, which involves body mechanics, time buffered schedules, and memory capacity, as well as the impact of the location of the training. And again, we'll provide you with resources that we hope that you can use when passing along this information to other folks in your organization. The Hazard Communication Standard through MIOSHA is in three parts, 42, 92, and 430. And its basic mandate is that employers make sure that hazards associated with chemicals in the workplace are communicated in a clear and consistent way. So employers using chemicals and employees exposed to them understand those hazards and the steps that need to be taken to ensure safe use. The standard provides uniform criteria for classifying, labeling, and documenting through safety data sheets. And this is all in accordance with a fairly recent update to the standard, which is the United Nations Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, which is abbreviated GHS. So who does the standard apply to? Any chemical that's present in the workplace that's used in such a way that employees may be exposed, either under normal circumstances or in a foreseeable emergency. It applies to both private and public sector employees. There are elements that apply to general industry, construction, and agriculture activities. And in general industry, it applies to manufacturers, importers, distributors, and employers, so throughout the supply chain. Chemical labeling is a very important part of the standard. The Globally Harmonized System, or GHS label, is any written, printed, or graphic material that's displayed on or affixed to containers of hazardous chemicals in the workplace. The very basic requirement is the labels must be legible. They need to be in English. They can be in other languages if desired, but they must be readable and in English and prominently displayed. And the labels must have the following 6 items, and we'll go through each of these in a moment. A product identifier, a signal word, hazard statements, pictograms, precautionary statements, and manufacturer information. Every hazardous chemical in the workplace needs a label, and the responsibility again runs through the supply chain. So manufacturers have the responsibility to label their products as they're made. An example of this would be the company that makes Clorox. Distributors have the responsibility to make sure that label remains intact. An example of that would be a Home Depot. And employers and employees have the responsibility to ensure that label is intact and accurate in the workplace and in use. It's also important to acknowledge the requirement for secondary labels, and that means if chemicals are transferred, the new container must be labeled with the product identifier and words, pictures, or symbols that convey the relevant hazards. Labels are an excellent source of information, but a little less detailed than a safety data sheet that we'll go through in a moment. In terms of the 6 items that are required on the label, the first is a product identifier. This is basically who made it. It's used to disclose the chemicals or product's name. It's found on the label, and if additional identifiers are needed beyond the product name, then those identifiers can be placed to the right of the manufacturer's information on a GHS compliant label. In terms of signal words, there are 2. They will document acute hazards or short-term hazards. These are those that occur after a single, sometimes fast or brief exposure from seconds to hours. These are common in accidents, spills, or emergency situations. And an example of an acute hazard would include chemical burns or dizziness or eye irritation. Chronic hazards, on the other hand, are long-term and result from repeated and prolonged exposure over months or years. These effects can often be delayed, and examples of these are the development of cancer or perhaps lung disease. The key differences in hazard communication used to indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard and alert the reader to a potential hazard on the label. There are only 2 words that are used as signal words, and these are danger and warning. Within a specific hazard class, danger is used for the more severe hazards, and warning is used for the less severe hazards. In terms of a hazard statement, this will describe the nature of the hazard of a chemical, including the degree of the hazard. So all of the applicable hazard statements must appear on the label. These statements are specific to hazard classification categories, and chemical users should always see the same statement for the same hazards, no matter what the chemical is or who produces it. Examples could be may cause fire or explosion, or the product is a strong oxidizer. Another example is that the chemical could cause severe skin burns and eye damage. Pictograms, which are shown through a series of 9 images on the screen on the right-hand side. This chart outlines their meanings. There's a red rectangle with the pointed side down that documents shows a picture of an exploding bomb for explosive or reactive materials. The same red box that's a little bit tilted also demonstrates corrosion with an image of skin corrosion or eye damage, and can also be corrosive to materials such as metals. The next is a flame over a circle for oxidizing gases, liquids, or solids. The gas cylinder is as described and signifies gases under pressure. For an environmental hazard, the red square encompasses a tree with a fish that appears to be impacted negatively by chemicals, and that's for aquatic toxicity. There's a skull and crossbones to signify acute toxicity, up to and including fatal. An exclamation mark is indicative of an irritant to eyes or skin. It could be a skin sensitizer, also indicates acute toxicity, potentially narcotic effects, respiratory tract irritants, and that it can be hazardous to other elements of the environment, such as the ozone layer. Health hazard is the picture of an upper torso and a head. This indicates a carcinogen, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitization, and that toxicity could potentially target a specific organ or aspiration. And the last of the nine is a flame, which indicates flammability, that it emits flammable gas. It could also be self-reactive. The GHS pictograms must be in the shape of a square set at a point. That square is red, and the hazard depicted inside is black on a white background. Precautionary statements describe the recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent. This is a key component of the label that focuses on preventive measures so that those adverse effects that result from exposure, improper storage, or handling of a hazardous chemical do not occur. And GHS categorizes precautionary statements according to whether they relate to prevention, in use, response in the event of emergency, storage in preparation for use, and disposal, again, in the event usually of a spill. And the last of the six is the manufacturer information, and the GHS labels must include the manufacturer's name, how to get a hold of them, the contact information, and that would include an address and phone number. So in summary, labels will describe who made the product, how to contact them if needed, how it can harm employees and to what degree, and recommended measures to prevent exposure, treat an exposure if it occurs, store the materials safely for use, and dispose of it if necessary. Safety data sheets, on the other hand, are much more detailed documents. They also need to be in English, can be available in alternate language formats, but must be in English and include information regarding the specific chemical identity and common names for that chemical. Safety data sheets are abbreviated SDS, and they have a prescribed format. They follow a 16-part format that's outlined by the globally harmonized system. And if no SDS has been received for a hazardous chemical, as businesses, the employer must contact the supplier, manufacturer, or importer from whomever they obtain the material and get one. They need to obtain an SDS and maintain a record of that contact if it didn't arrive with the product. Employers are required, they shall have an SDS in the workplace for each hazardous chemical which they use and have on site at all times. And they must be readily available. That can be either through paper, documentation, or available electronically. The two key sections that we'll focus on for the session today are Section 8. This will outline how to protect employees when we're focusing on prevention. This will prescribe engineering controls and personal protective equipment, and we'll talk a little bit about more of those things in a moment. And Section 10 has the reactivity data that workers should be aware of. It tells you if a product reacts in dangerous ways with other chemicals, if there's something that might be found in the workplace that it doesn't mix well with. An important concept in that Section 8 that's related to Section 8 of the safety data sheet is the hierarchy of controls. And this was developed by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH. And it's a framework for ranking hazards and hazard safeguards from the most to the least effective. It's an inverted triangle. That's an image depicted on the right-hand side of the screen. And the largest section or most effective is elimination. If there's a chemical that's in use that's hazardous and we can simply eliminate it from the process, that's the most desirable outcome. The next is to find something potentially less hazardous, or substitution. Beneath that is our engineering controls, such as air quality mechanisms that can perhaps evacuate hazardous fumes from a working environment. If that's insufficient to safeguard employees, the next step is administrative controls, where scheduling and limiting the exposure of the employee to the hazard is incorporated into the process. And the last line of defense is PPE, which stands for personal protective equipment. So you can see that this prioritizes physically removing hazards, in other words, stopping the process, over relying on human behavior, such as training or scheduling, to ensure maximum worker safety with the personal protective equipment that is commonly in use, such as safety glasses or gloves, kind of the last line of defense for employee safety. So a few things to remember from a compliance perspective. A good HazCom program will make employees aware of the routes of entry into the body, how it can get in you or how it can get on you to cause harm. And that includes inhalation, ingestion, absorption, or even injection. It also makes employees more aware of how the body needs protection from the hazardous substance, and it's always best to select the least harmful chemical first before considering use of something stronger. And a good HazCom program should ensure that employees understand what the labels and pictograms mean, so that they're fully aware of the steps to take for safe use. Employers shall, that's the language in MIOSHA standards that indicate a firm requirement. And employers shall communicate chemical hazards through a written hazard communication plan. They need to communicate these hazards at the employee's initial work assignment and anytime there's a change in assignment or if a new chemical hazard is introduced to the work site. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Thanks, Todd. This section is focused on how to train your employees effectively. We believe each person, regardless of neurotype, has a preferred learning method. So the following is meant to help employers improve training methods for better outcomes overall. So employees of different neurotypes may have different needs to consider. Talking to employees directly about their preferences is the best way to ensure learning needs are met. So, gain trust by asking for consent to ask neurodivergent employees ways on improving trainings. Creating a trusting relationship is important so that in times of stress, like injury, employees can go to employers without fear. Neurodiverse employees can have anxiety, so be patient. Overall, it's best to speak concise and in a neutral tone. Some employees may need additional support and freedom to ask questions to better understand what's being talked about. It is important to forge this trust early on. A great way to forge this trust is to treat questions with respect so that employees do not fear being ridiculed in the future. There's an example of this here. There is a picture of some acid wash to the right, and I'm going to go through an example of a conversation during a training. So the first line is the employee, and then the next line is the manager. So the employee asks, "What cabinet do I get this cleaner from?" And the manager says, "There are two utility closets, one on each floor. I will show them both to you." The employee asks, "Can I add a colored sticker to the bottle? Corrosive is more of a teal color to me, so it would be easier to spot." The manager says, "Let's talk about that more after the training. We have to make sure if we can do that. We want to be cautious that it doesn't conflict with the labeling process in place." So in other words, there may be certain things that help an employee remember what is what or process the information that they're being given. And taking those questions respectfully is the best way to ensure that an employee not only feels like they're being heard, but is processing the information that they're given. Another consideration, some neurotypes have what is termed as black and white thinking. They cannot see the gray in between. This is the way their brain sees situations, usually with only two solutions. And it also leads to rigidity or believing there is only one right way to do things. So the reason why we mention this is just because we want to, you know, just repeat that it's important to be concise with directions um, in order to ensure that employees are um, being able to follow the directions clearly. Universal design also is a great way to ensure that your trainings help all neurotypes. It allows educators and learners to set clear goals, anticipate environmental barriers, create meaningful options, and fully embrace human variability. Having multiple methods to learn safety ensures that everyone has the resources they need to learn processes, regardless of neurotype. So consider making step-by-step documents, signs, videos, and plan on showing processes in person. This way, everyone can have multiple options to learn the same information. Sensory overload is a very important topic. This is a state where the brain receives too much sensory input to process, leading to symptoms like anxiety, irritability, confusion, and physical discomfort. It can be triggered by common stimuli such as loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, and crowded spaces, but also by emotional stress, physical fatigue, or environmental changes. During sensory overload, information is less likely to be retained. So this leads to an unsuccessful training. So recognize triggers and use strategies like reducing exposure to stimuli, using sensory aids, or having a quiet space can help manage it. Consider ways to ensure neurodiverse people are comfortable when training to ensure information is more easily retained. So, especially when it comes to employees with autism, they can have sensitivities. In other words, they may be extra sensitive to loud noises or bright lights or other things that we'll go through in the next few slides. So it's important to ask if there's any changes to the environment that could help their learning experience and prevent sensory overload. While some of these can help during the training, it may not be appropriate while equipment is operating, if there's equipment involved. Some items that can be offered, white noise machines, access to white noise music. There's a lot of channels on like YouTube and things like that that are free. Tinted glasses and headphones. Auditory and visual considerations. Ensure that your trainings are also accessible. Neurodiverse people are prone to comorbidities. So visually, you should have large text and describe images or steps for anyone with low vision. When speaking, ensure that you are using a microphone if any employees have low hearing. Consider sensitivities to scents. For those who are sensitive to scents, some smells may be overwhelming, especially from machinery. There are ways to manage these scents personally and environmentally. So, for masking in a personal employee sense, there's things that you can do like rubbing Vicks Vapor Rub, lavender, peppermint oil, or even toothpaste under the nose or inside a mask. And that way, an employee can have that personal masking scent in their on their face. Um, there's also breathing exercises. You can breathe through your mouth or take shallow breaths. Sometimes even humming can block smells. Scented items like minty gum, strong mints, or Listerine strips can also help with this. For employee personal management, hygiene is important. Make sure your employees are wearing clean uniforms and stocks daily to avoid carrying odors. Um, if an employee really needs to take a break for fresh air, make sure that you are providing opportunities for employees to step away if they're becoming overwhelmed. For environmental management, make sure that you are controlling the sources of odors. Cleanliness is key. So make sure all surfaces are clean. Use enzymatic cleaners and make sure that there's proper air circulation or ventilation. Use fans or open windows when possible. Consider tactile sensitivities. This may include materials, a material consideration for employees' gloves. Always consider hypoallergenic options because, again, people who who are neurodiverse can always have comorbidities, and that includes skin conditions. So there's some key types of hypoallergenic hazmat gloves to consider. Nitrile gloves are, especially the powder-free ones, are good. They are the most common choice, 100% latex-free and provide a strong barrier against chemicals. Um, Accelerator-free ones are especially engineered to avoid type 4 chemical allergies or contact dermatitis caused by rubber accelerators during manufacturing. Vinyl gloves are good. They are a cost-effective latex-free and hypoallergenic alternative, but they are generally less puncture resistant than nitrile. Neoprene gloves offer an excellent protection against a wide range of hazardous materials as well. Also, if the employees will be handling wet or greasy hazardous materials, you should also consider having a texture or a grip on those gloves. Um, Now that we're past the sensitivities, we always consider proximity or um, proximity comfort or consent for an employee. Um, Something as simple as placing a hand on an employee's shoulder may be extremely uncomfortable to a neurodivergent employee. And this should be discussed for everyday interactions beyond training. So always ask for consent. For example, during an interactive training in person on how to go through hazard procedure, a trainer may want to show an employee a label up close. Trainers should ask if it's all right to be up close before showing each step. Also, let the employee learn by going through the steps themselves and uh, or handing them the container with the label. Consider some employees may prefer verbal or nonverbal communication. And nonverbal isn't just about not talking, it's about using diverse communication methods like gestures and visuals beyond speech, facing sensory challenges, or processing language differently, like literal, not nuanced. Sometimes certain neurotypes may need to go nonverbal, and the employee shuts down due to overwhelm. This requires patience and clear, direct communication, respecting their cues, and understanding their unique sensory processing needs to bridge the gaps. But overall, communication before a shutdown is essential for preparing for these moments. Though not required, some employees may even prefer having signs on their name badge that show their current availability verbally. Color coding can be helpful. This can also be helpful when employees wear headphones. We also have shown some examples in the past of, using green as like on a name badge as being able to talk and orange as not being able to talk, orange or red. Make sure when you make trainings, they are also clear. So examples to follow of some signage considerations when you are making a training plan. Um, Imagine a notice that says the following. Due to new Ordinance 4.0 of the Safety Committee, these signs must be next to hazardous materials. Describe the recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure, improper storage, or handling of a hazardous material. GHS categorizes precautionary statements according to whether they relate to prevention, response, storage, or disposal. Even though the sign isn't as lengthy as some of our other trainings in this section, it's still a little hard to see on a first glance, especially if this is a signage on the wall after a training, to try and remind people of what they learned. You should always consider something that's a little more concise of what you're trying to say. So I created something in Canva that kind of takes that information and makes it a little more concise from what Todd came up with in his part of the training. So this sign shows the most important information all on one page in larger text. So it says make sure it says notice, make sure containers have labels that say who made it, how to contact them if necessary, how it can harm you, and to what degree, and recommended measures to prevent exposure, treat an exposure, store the materials safely for use, and dispose of if necessary. I also added a section for more information in case employees have questions at the bottom. So always make sure that when you make signage that people are able to contact someone to ask questions. Also, another consideration is an emergency buddy. You may call it something else, but the main goal of this concept is to ensure that there's a trustworthy coworker nearby for a neurodivergent employee in times of an emergency who can guide them during moments they are overwhelmed. Uh, Proprioception is the awareness of one's body. You should also consider an employee's proprioception as some neurotypes do not perceive themselves well, especially if they are hyper-focused. They may work themselves too hard physically without even realizing until after a task is done. Be proactive with minders of self. Todd reminds me a lot specifically. Um, I have a bad back and I go to physical therapy for it once in a while and stuff. And sometimes when I am, just preparing for a conference and things like that, I'll just absent-mindedly like pick up heavy boxes without thinking about it. And Todd will kind of be like, "Hey, you might not be wanting to pick that up right now. Be good on your back." So I appreciate that from him. Um, Also, this is an important topic, time buffered schedules. This allows for processing and reflection of the material that has been learned. And this is good for all neurotypes. So consider having breaks during long trainings or breaks in video trainings. A good rule of thumb is a 15-minute break for every 1 to 2 hours in person or live. So be sure to break it up with activities and discussions. An example of a live training may look like an hour and a half of training with two breakouts in between, um, a 15-minute break in between that, um, plus another an hour and 15 minutes of a training with one activity, having a full hour lunch break after that, and then another hour and a half with two of training with two breakouts. This ensures that there's some breakouts of activity, which is good. Helps process things, especially for people who may have different learning types. Just sitting in a lecture all day is not a great way for people to process information. So breaking it up with either breakout discussions or activities is the best way to ensure that the brain is picking up more. What if you wanted to take that same roughly 6 hour training and record it? In other words, make it on demand or accessible at any time. That may look like 15 to 30-minute videos with questions in between. That would be best for learners. But understandably, that is a lot of editing for your employees to do, whoever is making that video. So break it up into hour-long videos. That's a good way for learners to pause and return to the content. Especially after all you can do to make a training, consider everyone's memory capacity. On average, it is estimated that 50% of what is learned is immediately forgotten. So spaced learning can help retain what is taught. So you may have like, let's say one training that's 6 hours, um, and then, maybe have another within a year. And that's maybe what the standards are. But according to this graph, on the Y, this is a memory capacity graph. So on the Y-axis is retention going up, and across the X-axis is time going from um, left to right. And we have some curves here. And the first forgetting curve is started off by learning something on day 0, and then there's no instances of active retrieval or review. And then that forgetting curve goes from the top of the graph almost to the very bottom of retention. So someone can just forget what they've learned over time after one training. However, um, there are multiple curves showing that if that same line of retention is supplemented with active retrieval or review, that line goes back up and the forgetting curve starts to flatten off across the x-axis. And that is good because then it shows that there's better long-term retention. There's also evidence showing that information retention for all neurotypes is also affected by location. So employees are more likely to remember information in the spot they learn that information. This means that procedures should be taught in the spot they will be used. So while I get this next part set up, think about how you can improve your safety training because we created a checklist for you to discuss with your employees and apply to your own training. So this is the material that we created for you guys, and it's in the Google link that I shared via email on Friday. It's also going to be in the chat soon. I will probably post that towards the end. Um, so this is a document called a considerations for trainings document. Um, and it's just supposed to help you consider the needs of all employees. Um, so for example, the first column is the type of consideration. The second column is the current training. And then the third column is any improvements that you can make to that training. So let's say you have a safety training in bloodborne pathogens, and you go to the first column and you ask yourself, can the employee freely ask questions? And the current training, the manager put employees can ask their managers via email after the training. But then in the final column, they put, we plan on making the training more interactive so employees can freely ask questions and that the trainer is respectful of all questions. And this goes on through all the different types of topics that were mentioned during this training, such as universal design and emergency contact information and things like that. So definitely check this out when you get access to the Google Drive if you haven't already done so. So we went through a lot of information today. I just want to put it out there. You guys can unmute yourselves if you want. Is there anything specific from this training that would be beneficial for your safety trainings? And again, feel free to unmute. We wanted to make this last part a little more interactive, give people a chance to share their own experiences.
Hey there, this is Darby from Mocha. Um,
Hello.
hi. From a job coaching perspective, we you addressed, that 50% of trained material sometimes is lost, and when you come back and you recall things, things are heightened. I think the challenge within job coaching is balancing what you're learning on the job with the safety trainings, right? Because those tend to
Right.
happen simultaneously. So, in terms of approaching safety measures, like how often would you recommend perhaps trying to get people to recall some of those things in it given that challenge?
Gotcha. Personally, I would say just as often as possible. Todd may have some more to say about that since he is good with the safety information itself. But as a person of learning design, I think safety is very important. So maybe even like just having a quick little quiz or recall of like one thing, maybe like once a week or something might be good because I know trainings are something that are required like, maybe like once a year or something if it's a safety training, but just having somebody recall like one little thing here and there can help learning over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
It's
Todd, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just jump in real quick, Katie. Thanks. A great question, Darby. Unfortunately, there's no set formula for each employee, so it's going to vary by the individual depending on um, their needs and their learning styles, and it's also going to depend on the work environment. So I would let, with safety being the prevailing concern, let the material that the employee is being asked to use and the nature of its hazards drive the frequency. So if they're interacting with something where there are several different safety precautions to take, um, I would say, without establishing a specific frequency, I would say persistent reminders until they demonstrate clear understanding of the hazards involved and the steps that they need for safe use. So Katie provides great perspective. Yeah, and unfortunately, um, daily or weekly, it's just going to depend on the work environment and on the employee. So not to punt the question down the road, but it is going to vary significantly. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. All right, Katie.
Hmm. Anybody else? Alrighty, I think that's about it. I don't want to take too much of people's day, so I'll leave the summary to Todd.
Thanks, Katie. So a few things to remember that first of all, where employees can get hazard information, um, employees have the right to know about any hazards that are involved in the materials that they're using in the workplace. And in fact, when this law was passed in the mid 80s, it was referred to as the right to know law. Workers should be able to demonstrate that they know how to get the information provided by the labels as well as the safety data sheets. They should know about the supplier and workplace labels and other ways that are used to identify products and what these labels mean. And they must also know how to get the safety data sheets, either by the binder location if it's paper or by accessing a computer if it's electronic access, so that they have a way to obtain information that's significant to their health and safety while they're on the job. And those SDS have to be in a location, again, whether paper or electronic, that's readily available to employees during working hours. What are the hazards of the controlled product? The worker should be able to read and understand the label and the safety data sheet as well, to be able to be aware of any possible harmful effects for the material in question, understanding how they're protected from those hazards through the controls that are used in the workplace. That's also necessary, whether that's engineering or administrative controls, personal protective equipment, and remember that hierarchy of controls where eliminating the material is the strongest, and the personal protective equipment is kind of the last line of defense. And it's also important that folks need to know what to do if something goes wrong. So what to do in case of an emergency, understanding the procedures to follow in the event of common incidents such as spills, accidental releases, less common occurrences such as fire or poisoning that are involved in a controlled product. We need to know how to respond and what to do, again, if there is a problem. And included in the understanding is the use of personal protective equipment that may be necessary, perhaps not as part of performance of the everyday job duties, but only in case of emergency. So that should be involved in the training as well. And in the event medical treatment is required for an exposure, important to remember that it's helpful to have a copy of the safety data sheet available to the healthcare provider. Remember that all considerations and accommodations will support effectively a diverse workforce. And when creating trainings, remember to consider the needs of all your employees to improve retention and to improve safety. We'd like to thank you for taking time to join us this morning. I'm happy to take any questions in conclusion, or if you have questions that come up after the session, feel free to reach out to either Katie or myself. She will provide you with access to the resources that we've developed. And we also have a short list on the screen of the materials that were used to inform our presentation today. Those are from MIOSHA that include a template for a written hazard communication plan. They publish a very helpful right to know or hazard communication compliance guide. There is required postings under the standard, and those are available through MIOSHA as well. both where safety data sheets are located and when a new product or a substantial revision to an existing product is introduced in the workplace. The federal OSHA and Centers for Disease Control resources are outlined on the screen, several publications, briefs, and fact sheets that are very, very useful. And the additional information on that hierarchy of controls diagram can be found through the CDC website. There is also a very helpful guide for those of you that are operating janitorial or custodial crews, the Safety and Health Field Guide for Professional Cleaners, with references shown on the screen here, is also an excellent resource. And if you need follow-up information on that, just contact Katie or myself. And then Katie also has a wealth of resources that she draws upon, in addition to her educational expertise and lived experience, that inform these presentations and how to make them more neuro-inclusive. Again, this training was developed through our partnership with MIOSHA, for which we're very grateful. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great week, everybody.